Professor Joy Ngozi Ezeilo. She hasn't moved an inch. She's still
Yeah, I'm still sitting here.
Yeah, Prof. Before we actually went on break, a short break, I drew your attention to the fact that many people think that culture and religion remain obstacles to gender equality. How do we balance respect for tradition with the demand for human rights?
Yeah, that's really true. Even though we don't want to say the word culture, but remember, culture is supposed to be mirror of accepted usage, and it's supposed to reflect modernity, socioeconomic changes, urbanization, all of those things that are markers of globalization, which is consumerism, travels, migration. But then, when it comes to culture, you will see that it doesn't seem to be shifting as it's supposed to shift. Look at all the real Igbo culture that has a negative effect on women. If you look at it, for example, it hasn't shifted. If you go to elsewhere in Yoruba land, it hasn't, except that those that were recognized from the beginning were still recognized. There are no new grounds that were breaking, even despite laws. Take, for example, Keja and Okeja, Mojeku and Mojeku, Mojeku and Ibuchuku, all of those Nweke and Anekwe, they have said that women have a right to inheritance, and it's unconstitutional to deprive women of that right. In fact, the late Nikki Toby, when he was deciding Mojeku and Mojeku, said we need not go to Beijing, because that came in 1997, 2 years after Beijing, and he used that word. Women need not go to Beijing for you people to know that their rights, constitutional rights, should be protected, including for inheritance. So why are we still holding that? People say, oh, a woman gets married and move out of the family. So it's a culture that she is not part of the lineage. And on the other hand, you hear them say inheritance follows the blood. So even if she's married elsewhere, inheritance follows the blood. So she should also be excluded. So it becomes a band that can't patch anywhere. So, and because of even all this conception right from birth, I do say that it takes 10 lives to survive womanhood or girlhood. Because at conception, you could be aborted by selection because they are looking for a male, or abandoned to death. At birth you could be rejected because you're a girl.
That was an old practice.
Yeah, but it's happening. It's not an old practice, because people now do sex selection, and they can determine ahead of time through the in vitro and all of that. So they abort the ones they don't want. At birth, a woman can be rejected. One, yeah, and then neglect follows such rejection, infanticide and abandonment, and this is worldwide, not just in Nigeria. And you talk about political participation, leadership. It takes 9 lives to survive womanhood. The problem is enormous. It follows them from cradle to grave, and they are primarily caused by culture, religion, tradition, social norms, and negative social norms. So those negative social norms, coupled with religion, some religion become acculturized, that you can't tell which one is Islam, which one is culture, which one is Christianity, which one is the culture. And at times you see total coincidence or collapse, so that even some churches wouldn't protect women's rights, because they're also accustomed to traditions. And even those priests, clergy, imams, they are all brought up in that same culture, so they tend to uphold those culture. So that is a big problem. That's why we say we need a lot of sensitization, targeting negative social norms, and targeting patriarchal structure, trying to shift mind, attitude, transform social norms, so that people can recognize that times have changed and things have shifted, and that we can no longer take benefit of modern times and modern technology and still hold on to those things that causes abuse and degrading and takes away dignity of another. That human right is for women, human right is for girl children, and human right is for all. And everyone should enjoy it equally, because everyone is equal before the law. That we do away with cultures that are discriminatory, uphold ones that binds us, that give us that sense of belonging, that sense of oneness, that sense of our root and where we are coming from. And we can still do that without suffering women or sacrificing women's dignity and right in protection of those. Unfortunately, in some places, and I'll still use Igbo land as an example, even the Omoada phenomenon, they've internalized their position that they can't even differentiate, but their men make them custodians of culture, and they are the ones who enforce what is even against them and their fellow women. Take, for example, widowhood practices, and yet they belong to CWO, they belong to Anglican Union, they belong to all of these churches. So what are we doing? So that's why even in WACOL now we have a project, working with Christian women and women culture or leaders of culture, because we feel it's important so that we can have this conversation, understand where the problem is, so that they too are not reinforcing violence, so that they too can respond. When you remember Sinachi, a gospel singer, yes, if there were some kind of church protection solidarity group that talks about those issues, she could have maybe let one or two people know, they would have protected her, and then she wouldn't have failed. Because the issue is that when you think of how women who left marriage, divorce, and all of that are treated, no woman wants that, and women want to be able to be there and raise their children. And because of the children, they may die in marriage. They may not break their silence, which is a problem. And that's why we talk to them that you have to. Gender-based violence is still very rife. Trafficking of women in Nigeria is still going on, even complicating now. Everyone now, the organ trafficking now becoming even a risk for others. Spousal battery, domestic labor, harmful cultural practices, including early, because if you talk of harmful practices, remember it includes early and forced marriage. It includes female genital mutilation, female circumcision, widowhood practice, disinheritance of women from land, from property, despite Supreme Court judgment. So where do we begin? Is it a crime to be a woman? In fact, one client wrote it and said, it appears, and she's not that very literate, she said, it appears that is a crime to be born a woman, given her own struggle in her own rural community. And we've seen women who have been sanctioned for raising their voice, and then they sanction that the whole community, what it is to be a community sanction, that they can't walk around. In one case, they say she can't take even a vehicle from there, and she was walking until WACOL came and intervened, and then the community people living outside were scandalized. They say, we didn't even know this was happening in our community. The other day, they nearly lynched a woman. They say he was harvesting a snail in a forbidden forest. All of these things. And again, they forget that hunger, food security. Women are the insecurity. Women are the ones that are closest to children. They rather not eat than feed their children. So this food insecurity, lack of sustainable livelihood, and women are constantly battling. So, and the woman lynched. Remember the other time another woman was naked, also paraded in town for apparently also the same snail. And we're not asking questions, even though they were denying they did not get these snails from the forbidden forest. But these are things, digital violence driven by technology is also high. Phone revenge, globally, not just in Nigeria, the online bullying, cyber attacks, and all of that, So we have a long way. We need to deal with the barricades. We have had milestones, I must admit. The Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act and Violence of 2015 that is now was part of drafting it. I was at the center of it from beginning to the end. And the Violence Against Persons law that many states have passed, and that also the wives of governors of different states have contributed, and the governors forum and made sure that these laws were passed. They are very beautiful laws, and they protect all persons. But the problem is how many of them are being enforced. Even the issue of spousal battery, inflicting, intimidating, cyber stalking, physical injury, abandonment of wives, rape at the minimum sentencing, they are all there. Maintaining of sexual offenders register. Thank God, Nigeria also is now beginning to maintain that through NAPTIP that is administering the federal act, the VAT Act 2015. But we still have a lot of economic inequality and the lack of workforce participation. In a way, it will improve women's economy. So the gender gap in the participation opportunities is still very wide, with 70% of the country's poor being women. Can you imagine? So poverty wears a woman face in Nigeria. The poorest of the poor. That's what IMF says, representing 49.3% of the population. So poverty wears a woman face. And even Action Aid again did one research in 2014, and it said that women's labor force participation rate stand at 56 compared to 80% of men. So that's also highlighting a substantial disparity in workforce representation. And the gender gaps in terms of wage, that one is even very high and difficult to fulfill. So access to education, healthcare, the gap in adult literacy, even though still high, Nigeria is larger than the sub-Saharan average. So that's where the problem comes, with a 20.5% gap compared to 20.4% for the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, according to World Bank data. So on healthcare, especially maternal and reproductive health rights, deaths due to pregnancy, they are still unacceptably high. Safe motherhood should be a right as a part of right to life. 993 women die per 100,000 live births due to pregnancy-related cause in Nigeria. Isn't that too high? So, as rightly observed by World Bank, the maternal mortality rate has improved, even though it has improved from 1,344 in 2000 to 993 in 2023. It's still high.
Okay, Prof, let's just see, look at the role of WACOL and Tamar SARC.
Yeah.
What role they played or they're playing in bridging the gap between victims and justice. Are they striking successes?
A lot, because I'll tell you, from 1997 WACOL started. I think our legal aid began actively in 1999, but by 1998 we have few cases. So between then and now, 28 years, WACOL has provided, just call it, we said 1,000 something, call it 82,000 free legal aid to women and children in difficult circumstances. WACOL continue to be a leader in promoting human rights education, in making women's rights a reality, in translating these laws and making sure they are effectively implementing, in educating administrators of justice, the whole law enforcement agency, government, judiciary, about these laws and how they must and should work for women. So with that type of sensitization, and in particular engaging in dialogue, because we need to also dialogue, understand where others are coming from, and then and find a common solution. So we have engaged with traditional and cultural leaders, religious leaders. We've worked on issues like trafficking. We have offices across Nigeria and even West African sub-region. And of course, we do a lot of international work as well, engaging human rights bodies within Africa and beyond. And when you look at, but what really is closest to us, to mark, is that when you talk of access to justice, because rights in the book or laws in the books is one thing, and if people don't recognize their rights, how do they respond to it? So we have what we call legal literacy series we publish. We educate people on this. We importantly, for those who have suffered violation, provide them assistance to seek redress, to get justice when they are in search of redress. Because if they don't get justice, how do you get them empowered or even to believe in those rights, that they are not mere rhetorics? So the issue of justice is so central to the work we do, that a woman can drop in. We're the first to build shelter for women in Nigeria. And that was my first house building experience as a woman, that in 2001, by 2000 we've acquired the land, and by 2002 we have finished building an ultra-modern shelter. Before then, in 1998, we started offering safe space and shelter for women. So WACOL started in 1998. We had a house, and then we built our own specifically for this issue. And then, of course, like now, we're also focusing on skill empowerment and having a very huge skill empowerment center for women. And we've acquired also a place for that purpose. Because I believe in real empowerment. We started what we call Widows Weep Not, Women's Economic Empowerment Project. We have widows group with sponsors, CBOs, not just in Enugu State. We sponsor them across Nigeria, and we try to make sure they have flexible funding, microcredit that runs, not a question of the one you collect back, revolves, and the one that they can use and empower themselves. So we do quite a lot, because for us, gender equality and women's empowerment go hand in hand. And we believe in empowerment of all women and girls, that will lead also to prevention of violence. It will reduce violence, sexual and gender-based violence significantly. So it's not easy, it's not uhuru. I wouldn't say that our work at WACOL or Tamar SARC is done. It's through support of donors that we still get by. We know that Tamar SARC was a special initiative of me. I named it Tamar after the first woman in the Bible that was raped. And then when Justice for All approached us, and then we approached the Enugu government that we want to work with them. And then the gender donated a facility we renovated. The Ministry of Justice, heavily under the leadership of the Honorable Attorney General Tony Ani, also drafted beautiful MOU that brought together health, justice, women affairs, and that even the police asked to be joined. So that's how we started it, and WACOL was the one overseeing that center. And from there, we finished that project, and we continued because it's already a registered name of WACOL in terms of subsidiary of WACOL, that Tamar SARC. And the idea of Tamar SARC was specialized services for women victims of sexual assault. And it was to provide that in a way that is a one-stop center, and a comprehensive center that will deal with medical, deal with legal, deal with psychosocial, and deal with the whole counseling, a whole gamut of whatever is required to make the woman who is a victim traumatized whole and become a survivor. Is all what is envisaged by Tamar SARC.
Okay, we have the younger women. I don't have those we call the Gen Zs.
Yeah.
Okay, how can they take ownership of this movement?
Yeah.
Of course, in what ways would they be different from what the older generations have done? Because if you take a proper look, the life of the Gen Zs seem to be radically different from their own life. So how do you find the synergy between the old and the new?
A lot, and I think we use them because we started this by 2020 during that COVID time. We launched what we call Girls Well, for example. Girls Well, the girls can and they can achieve anything, and the focus was on STEM, getting women, into science, technology, engineering, mathematics. These days we call it STEM, even arts, because women can excel in any profession, including art. You're right, Gen Zs, we must recognize that we have to hand baton to the next generation, and we must begin to bridge that generational, intergenerational gaps. I, for one, have recognized it throughout my career, and I mentor women, and that's why when WACOL started, I said 95, if not 99% of the workforce will be women, because I believe in women leadership, building women as transformational leaders.
Think that was a discrimination?
No, it wasn't at that time. But now, of course, we include men in our work because we recognize that we cannot get that change and get to where we are without men. And progress for women is progress for men, and that we have to also catch them young and then make sure that they have the right mind. I recall one of the research I was doing over 20 years ago, and I went to one school, think WTC, when I asked them what's the difference between man and woman, a boy jumped up and said the difference is clear. I said, wow, this is masculinity, and this one we want them to have positive masculinity, not negative one. So look at the trafficking work we did. We call it youth advocate. Once we brought youth advocates, the training was online, their work was online. There are people we have never seen, but we saw their photos and we verified them and everything. And they were young people. Come and see campaign. Come and see what they do on trafficking. So we cannot do this work, you're right, because they approach, and they are quite effective with social media. They are quite effective with dissemination. They will tell you the channels that work, for young people that they listen, and then how to bring them on board to what you're doing. So it's very important in ICT, and we have abundance of youth that make up huge population of our country. So why not men and women get them involved in the fight, and fight for respect for human rights, of women of all, and for access to justice for all. So human rights education within that context is a cornerstone, so that people understand the gender dimension, that women are not trying to take over. Women are not saying they want to become men, but we are saying that sex discrimination, that they are recognized right, that they be treated fairly as human beings capable of enjoying right and equal right with men.
Well, if for perchance, which I know you do, but if in the very official capacity you have the ears of the leaders of Nigeria today, and what would you advise them? What would be the action you want them to take to immediately ensure that all the items listed in the Beijing Declaration, at least 80% of that would have been achieved in Nigeria?
Yeah, I think the issue is that, yes, we had the Ministry of Women. It's a machinery, an institutional mechanism, recognized, by Beijing Declaration. In fact, our own was established at the eve of the Beijing. We went to the regional forum in Dakar, and then it was under Abacha, the wife of Abacha. They were announcing the establishment of Ministry of Women Affairs. So, but it looks like, even in retrospect, the ministry is becoming like a drawback, because then every issue is cocooned there and they don't have the budget. So we would like to see the Ministry of Women Affairs empowered to have both the technical capacity and the financial capacity to do the work that will bring to fruition the 12 critical areas of concern. But beyond that, we need to mainstream gender across other MDAs. We cannot just leave it to Ministry of Women Affairs. They alone cannot achieve it. All hands must be on deck. Civil society, gender-focused group, faith-based organization, private sector, they must all be on board. The status of women in Nigeria appears to be a case of one step forward, two steps backward. You see the rejection of the 5 gender bills then by the last 9th Assembly. Now we have the special seat before the 10th Assembly, and we hope that that special seat can pass. You notice that the Gender and Equal Opportunity Bill, GOB, has been now, we don't know the status anymore. Some states are trying to pass it, but it's been there in National Assembly. Our late friend and colleague, Obi Nwankwo, championed this thing. May God bless her soul. And I hope that in her memory, that this bill and this Gender and Equal Opportunity bills that she really, really championed and really wished that Nigeria would get to have, it comes to fruition. Accountability for women and girls' rights is a state responsibility, and state must recognize. But I see where the problem is budgeting. You hardly find a budget that goes to women's issue. Is it that woman who turns up in police station? Will that police station be able to handle the woman, even provide her medical? No. Rather, they will even tell her that we don't have money to go and arrest, that we don't have vehicle to go and arrest. Will a woman who dies from maternal mortality, what is the air budget that goes to prevention of maternal mortality and to even paying for a woman to have birth, knowing that that childbirth is important, that reproductive role for as a social function? Look at countries looking for women to have children, and women are having less and less children, and the country have the pyramid, inverted pyramid in terms of population growth. Older people are working till 70 and above, and then their youth population is declining. Now we have it, we are not paying attention. Nigeria must protect, respect, fulfill the human rights of women. And the conclusion reached is that gender equality is both a cause and a consequence of gender discrimination, sexual and gender-based violence, and women's access to equal education, to employment, resources, power, participation. We are not where we are. Where the power is, women are not. It's still like a mirage. So we must make sure that women's rights are really a reality. So the time is now. The journey has not been easy. It has been treacherous. Gains have been made, progress have been made, milestone recorded. The barricades are still there. Government, if they are serious, will put their money where their mouth is. We need political and economic leadership, not just political commitment. We need that backed up by money, because money will make it possible. If you don't provide for women's health, if they are not them have access to, how can they get it? If the legal aid doesn't cover issues of concern to women and deals with crime, how can it cover their socioeconomic needs? So we need to prioritize gender accountability and advance the status of women and ensure that the commitment made in Beijing becomes a reality. We are still off the mark. We've done well in some areas, I must say, the law, but law is not a panacea. And law in action is different from law in books, de jure and de facto. So we need to bridge them and bridge that gap to make sure that this law works for all and that women's rights are human rights. And 30 years down Beijing, Nigerian women can raise their hand and their voice, and they know they count and they matter, even in laws and constitutional laws, the constitutional law governing the country.
Yes, Prof, I want to thank you. I believe that despite of the progress you've made and the young men have made, that the biggest room on the world is room for improvement.
Sure.
There's still room for improvement. But I think I'll be fulfilling my duties if I let the conversation go without actually going a little bit political.
That's
yes, that has to do with what's happening in the Senate between Senator Natasha. Of course, is a topical issue. Is one prominent woman in the Senate, and of course, whether they politicize the issue. But what's your thought on that?
Anyway, of course, you know, it's sub judice, and I'm a lawyer.
Okay,
I'm a senior advocate.
The is a court.
It is a court, and it's really at a very critical junction.
This is the second time I'm having a lawyer on this program, and he's going to run away from a matter on the issue of sub judice.
No, not running away. Definitely, we understand what is sexual harassment. We understand the need to have laws that protect women. We understand the need for women to have their voice. And we want all women, you know, to get there, you know. But then when it is already a subject of court, and for people like us that are also high level, a professor of law and SAD, then it might not be professionally okay.
You know, there was also a SAD, and they ran away from the matter.
Yeah. So it will not be professionally okay for me. But of course, you know, I'm a passionate advocate for women's rights, and then I'm a passionate advocate for ending all forms of violence, including sexual violence against women.
Okay, Professor Joy Ngozi Ezeilo, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, OON, of course, Life Venture. I don't think we'll thank you enough for finding time to be here. We don't want you to go on and on. Of course, time is not our friend. Thank you for sharing your insights and for your tireless commitment to advancing the rights of women, not only in Nigeria, but globally. Well, to our viewers, 30 years after Beijing, the story of Nigerian women is one of progress, pain, resilience, and unfinished business. The challenge before us is clear: to ensure that equality is not just promised, but lived in every home, community, and institution. Of course, it has been beyond the headlines on Freedom Square TV, and of course, our guests have been Professor Joy Ngozi Ezeilo.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. And we hope
you.
that when we call on you soon, you will oblige us with your presence.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time, and importantly, the public issues and issues of public interest you do take on your program. I would just say more grace to you and to your team at Freedom Square. Yeah, it's really freedom. We all have to be in it together, and we are in it together.
Thank you very much. And to our viewers, this conversation is not over. You can continue on our Facebook page, on our YouTube at Freedom Square TV. Thank you for being a part of this conversation, special edition of Beyond Headlines. Same time tomorrow morning. Oh, tomorrow is Sunday. So, see you on Monday. Have a lovely day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Come on.
Yeah, oh my God.
Wait, let me off this. Let me end it first.